All right, guys, so if you remember on Friday, standard form are just very specific linear equations are written in a very specific format. So if we concentrate on number 3 here, there is a specific thing that we have to do in order to put this in standard form. And number 1 is just recognizing that it is a linear equation. Now, what do you guys think? Is this equation a linear equation? Yeah, it would be, because if you remember the rules that I told you guys, what I told you guys to write down on Friday, it follows all the rules of what it can be and also follows the rules that it can't be. So this is a linear equation. Now, if you ever have a linear equation, you can write that linear equation in standard form. In order to be in standard form, your A and your B, aka your X and your Y, have to be on the same side. So if I look at this example here, are my X and Y on the same side of the equation? No. So that means it's your job to do it. Make sure that they're in the same side. Now, before we do, there's another rule that you have to follow. Your A, the coefficient in front of that X has to be positive. So check out that X. Is it already positive? Yeah. So that tells you that you need to leave your X there. You need to move your Y to the opposite side. What I mean by moving it to the opposite side mathematically is to do the opposite. If that's a 4y, the opposite of a positive 4y is a negative 4y, or minusing 4y. And that's what I mean by mathematically moving something over. Now, 4y minus 4y is 0. Don't get hung up because you don't have a value. It's still represented with the value of 0. Now, notice over here, I have 8x minus 4y plus 10. Can you combine any of those terms? No. So let's just go ahead and rewrite it. 8x minus 4y plus a positive 10. Now you can clearly see that we have our x and y on the same side. My A is positive, but do I have everything else on the other side, aka the constant? No, right? Because notice that I have my X and my Y, but I have my constant, my C, on that same side. So I need to move it to the opposite side. So while I'm doing that, you can probably see that these standard forms, the battle is one, recognizing it's linear. The second battle is just moving stuff around. You just got to know where to move it. So let's go ahead and do that. 0 minus 10 is just a negative 10. It's equal to 8x minus 4y. Now are we in standard form? Now, I believe about 99% of students will say yes. My x and y are on the same side. My A is positive, everything else on the other side. And they'd be like, yeah, that's a standard form. And for the most part, you would be right. Except there's one more thing that you have to watch out for. Your A, B, and C, the coefficients in front of the variables and that constant have to be integers. Now, are all my A, B's, and C's integers in this situation? Yes. But is the greatest common factor 1? Now, what I mean about having a greatest common factor of 1 is that there shouldn't be a number that divides all 3 of those coefficients evenly that is not 1. Now, is there a number that divides 10, 8, and 4 evenly that is not 1? 2. So that means that you have to do something about it. Now, the easiest thing is once you find the number that divides all of them, you literally just have to divide all those numbers by the whatever that common factor is. Negative 10 divided by 2 is a negative 5. 8 divided by 2 is a positive 4. Don't forget your x. Negative 4 divided by 2 is a negative 2. And don't forget your y in that situation. And now you're ready. You'll notice that your x and y are on the same side. Your a is positive. There's no number that divides all the 3 of those coefficients. Really, that's not 1. So now you're good to go. This isn't a standard form. Your a is going to be equal to the coefficient in front of the x, which in this situation is a 4. Your b is going to be the number in front of the y, which is a negative 2. And then your c is going to be whatever your constant is, which in this situation is a negative 5. And that's it. Yes, sir.
Where does the 2 come in?
This 2 real quick?
Yeah.
Well, this 2.
When you divide by 2.
Well, okay, perfect. So what we did there is when we originally had our situation here, where we had our x and y on the same side, in order to be in standard form, the greatest common factor between all your coefficients has to be 1. AKA, what I'm really trying to get at, there shouldn't be any number that divides those 3 coefficients that isn't 1. Now we thought, hey, I have a 10, an 8, and a 4. Does there exist a number that divides those 3 numbers? Yes, and that number would be 2. So that's where that 2 came from knowing that 2 divides all those numbers. And then we actually just did the division. And then now we're in standard form. right, guys, so if you guys remember, this whole unit is all about linear equations and linear graphs. Now, you know how to recognize a linear equation, you know how to put it in standard form. Now, this is why we even bother doing so. Now, before we actually start diving into actually what we're gonna do with it, let's talk about what we are doing. My goal right now is to show you guys how to graph lines. Now, would you guys agree that in order to graph a line, at minimum, all you need is 2 points? Because if you can find 2 points that are specifically on a line, you can draw that line between the 2 points, or try your best, because you can see that I kind of messed that one up, right? Would everybody agree with that? Awesome. So this is why standard form is really, really nice in terms of graphing lines. Because if you know that little tidbit that, okay, if I have an equation and I can find 2 specific points on that line, I could really easily graph a line quickly. Now, let's be a little bit kind of like, let's remember how in the world do we find points? Now, remember, when you have a point, you have a specific x that's in relationship with y. If you were to plug in that x, you would get that y out, or so forth and so forth, right? Now, you could choose to find any point your heart desires. If you're like, man, my favorite number is 12, I'm going to plug in a 12 and figure out what the y is, you could do that. But would it make really sense to put a 12 in? You could, but it's not beneficial. Does anybody know any easier numbers that we could deal with? 1, I agree, 1's pretty easy. Is there even an easier one? 0. Now, this is my suggestion here. You know you have a linear equation. You know that can be represented with a linear graph. It is your job to find 2 points. My suggestion is to plug in a 0 for the x and find out its pair, its y. Now, why did I choose 0? Because it's easy to deal with. Let me show you what I mean. This is 3 times x minus 4y is equal to 12. 3 times whatever x is, which is 0, minus 4y is equal to 12. Now, trying to solve that equation there, what's anything times 0? 0. So what are we left with? Negative 4y is equal to 12. And what would I have to do to solve for that y? Divide by negative 4. So you'll notice that quite easily, these are really easy to solve. You just got to make sure you got the motion of what you're doing here. Now, again, what did I do? I plugged in the 0 for the x because I chose that 0 to find its y. Now that I have found its y, I have found a very easy point quickly. 0, negative 3. Okay, that's 1 point. Let's go ahead and even graph that there. 0, negative 3 could be located right over here. Let me change colors just to show you that I'm flipping a switch here. I need to find another point. Now, what do you guys think? For the x, we could plug in anything our heart desires for the x, but notice that we could also plug in anything we want for the y. Doesn't matter, right? We can plug in for one thing and solve for the other. Now we've already put a 0 in for x. Why don't we just put in a 0 in for y now and solve for the x? It's the same thing, right? It's all right. Let me show you how quickly that's done. 3 times x. Now I don't know what my x is because that's what I'm looking for. Minus 4 times my y of 0 is equal to 12. Negative 4 times 0 is 0. What do I got to do to solve for that x? Just divide by 3. So notice that you're left with x is equal to a positive 4. So you have found another point quite quickly. 4 of 0 is 1. Now that you got 2 points, you can easily draw a line through it to represent that graph. Now pretend that that line went through those 2 points. You could get used to doing things super mechanically to help you do whatever math you're doing at the time. So my suggestion for you guys, if this was my piece of paper and they're like, hey, I want you to graph this equation. The first thing that I would do is I'd make a really quick X and Y chart like I'm doing over the one I have now. I would get used to putting this setup because if you do the setup mechanically, you can kind of see what it's telling you to do. It's telling you to plug in a 0 for X and solve for Y, then put in a 0 in for the Y and solve for X. So you can use that to help you out.
Will it always be 0?
It would always be, you can choose whatever you want. If you like to make your life harder, you could choose another number, but zeros are always nice. There ain't going to be a situation where it won't.
So like in the test,
Mhm.
like, it'll be 0.
Yeah, you get super mechanical with it. Yeah. So let's go ahead and kind of figure out how in the world am I going to use this chart, the information to do what I'm doing. So plug in a 0 in for the x and solve for y. So 2 times 0 plus 5 times y is equal to 10. You notice that 2 times 0 is always going to be 0, so that's why we choose 0. You're left with 5y is equal to 10, so divide by 5 on both sides. Y is equal to 2. So you can see there that it's quite straightforward, right? Now, keep in mind that you're really doing two separate problems in one because you're finding two different order pairs. And let's go ahead and plug a 0 in for the y to solve for the x. So 2 times x plus 5 times y, which is 0, is equal to 10. These divide out. Notice you're left with 2x is equal to 10. Divided by 2. X is equal to a positive 5. All right, everybody with me so far, kind of? Now, I know a lot of people are like, man, do we really have to graph these? Don't try to be too like, how would I say it, specific or precise. We're really trying to do is just get a quick visual of a graph. My suggestion is do a really quick X and Y chart. You see that we have 0, 2. So 0, 2 would be located with this coordinate point there. 5, 0 would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can see that we could actually quite quickly draw this faster than what it seems like, right? All right. So let's try number 3 because I know number 3 is one of your favorite for one reason only, those fractions. So I'm gonna give you guys some time, copy this down, and let's kind of think of how in the heck are we gonna attack number 3? All right, so I'm going to erase this. And again, I will post this. So that way, if you kind of missed anything, you can always look back and kind of try to figure out what I said at the time. Now, I feel like the vibe around town is that if you have a fraction, man, oh man, I don't like fractions. I like to get over them. But I'll tell you something, it's not, you're always going to deal with them. But that's okay, because we're going to practice on how to get rid of them. And remember, this fraction is just a fancy division, 1 divided by 2. What is the opposite of dividing by 2? Yeah, so all you have to do is not multiply one side, but multiply both sides by whatever you want. My suggestion again is to put the left side and the right side in parentheses. I'll bet my bottom dollar that you guys know how to use distributive property. I see so many less mistakes happen. And let's go ahead and distribute. What is 2 times 1/2? What's 1/2 of 2? 1. Keep in mind that we're going to have an x left over. What's 2 times 1/2 y? Y. And notice that you'll have 2 times 4. Notice that I forgot to multiply the left side. The good thing those parentheses there would remind me that I'm multiplying. 2 times 4 is 8. And just like that, it's even an easier problem to figure out your x and y coordinates. So I'll let you guys do that really quick, and then we'll go over it. So you can see here again that we have that standard form. It technically isn't a standard form because you have fractions, but we know how to get rid of fractions, which is what I did with multiplying by 2. Then I'm left with x plus y is equal to 8. So this is your time to plug in a 0 for the x and solve for y. If you plug in a 0 for the y, you'll notice that you're left with y equals 8. So there's not even really much work to do. Put a 0 in for the y, you're left with x equals 8. So just like that, you pretty much have it all done. Just gotta plot these points. 0 and 8 can be located right over here. So that's 8 and 0. And then 0 and 8 can be located right over there. And just like that, you have 2 points on a graph that you can draw a line through that represents every ordered pair of that equation.